Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.9 jungle tier list. So, draw content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, we saw nerfs towards Neferi, Yorick, and Gwen. And a slight buff to Morgana, mostly focused around support, but also affected both mid lane and jungle. Let's get into it. So the D tier is going to consist of relatively similar champions, with the addition of Shen. So Shen jungle isn't that performant at the moment in solo queue. I reckon there is some optimization which needs to be done here to really kind of elevate him up the tier list. Right now we're seeing a lot of Titanic Hydra rushes. Heart still seems to be more performant, but then there is also the lack of AoE which you get from Hearts, which is why you opt into going the Titanic in a lot of situations. It'll be interesting to see how builds develop, whether we start seeing Tiamat into Heart still, whether we continue just to see the full Titanic Hydra, but then the win rate gets elevated, maybe through some optimization of what components you're purchasing. But right now the pick does look to be in a pretty underwhelming state for jungle, albeit it is still a flex pick, so if you can play it, it is something that maybe you can bring out every so often into very specific matchups and compositions, but I'd recommend avoiding it if you haven't already put some time into Shen, or you're not very comfortable with the playstyle that he kind of enables. The other picks within the D tier are the likes of Skarner, who is still towards the low end of the D tier. I think this pick is still direly in need of a not a full rework, but just a readjustment in terms of where his numbers lie. I think he needs to be more solo queue bound rather than competitive bound, because his solo queue performance is really bad. His pick rate is really low compared to where it really should be, and I think the champion is just in a pretty dire state at the moment. A pick I wouldn't really recommend, just for the fact that he has pretty low agency, and he's also just not that performant for the average player in his current state. Silas has seen better days as a jungler. The pick obviously relies pretty heavily on snowballing early advantages, but he took a lot of damage out of his kit, and he's just not doing that at the moment as consistently. A pick I'd recommend avoiding in the current state of the game. Maokai, like Skarner, similar issues, competitively bound, low agency, pretty slow clear speed, just a pick I wouldn't really recommend for solo queue. Gragas is just in a pretty bad state for jungle all round at the moment. The pick probably do with a slight buff toward maybe like a jungle skew buff to really elevate him back to being a solid option again. Nasus is a champion which is almost entirely bound to low elo when played in the jungle. Obviously predicated around just stacking of camps and just getting to an abhorrently large amount of stacks and then hoping you just come into a fight and completely 1v9 it. Obviously you lack good ganks potential, you're very immobile, you're vulnerable early on into the game. This pick has a lot of issues that come with it, but if you can get to our dream state, it can have value, and you'll get to those states more consistently the lower rank you are within the game. Brand remains as a high D tier option, not quite enough at the moment out of this champion to really elevate him to the C tier. I think if he had direct buffs to his general kit, he could probably be bumped back up to the C tier, but right now he is in an underperformance state and remains as a D tier option. And Rengar, don't think this pick is bad by any means. I just think he's a difficult champion to play, and I wouldn't really recommend it. He's probably number 1 or 2 hardest junglers in the game to play, and he's incredibly elite skewed. You're very predicated on getting advantages and just understanding the limitations of your kit. Moving from the D tier to the C tier is Morgana. The champion got buffed this patch, and it was nice for jungle. I don't think Morgana jungle is unplayable. I just think it requires very specific environment or situations to really get good value out of the pick. Otherwise, it tends to end up being a bit lackluster, and you need to have some level of setup for your Q. Otherwise, the spell is too inconsistent, and if your Q's inconsistent, then your W becomes a lot more inconsistent. And you just need some things to go right for this champion for it to be really valuable. And I think right now it's just not strong enough to really promote as an option. Albeit, I think if you get in the right spot, it can be an okay pick. Do need to put some games into it though, and you do need to learn the clear. Otherwise, you will definitely be in a disadvantageous spot. Nidalee is a fine C2 option. She's also like Rengar, really difficult to play. And I'd only really recommend her if you're very good at piloting the pick. But if you can pilot the pick, then there is value to a champion like Nidalee at the moment. She is currently a three-way flex pick with both top and support Nidalee gaining traction at the moment. And solid C tier option in her current state. Talia sits within the C tier. Talia's A pretty hard jungler to play. She actually requires a decent amount of mastery to really like get good results on. But she's also in a pretty weak spot for jungle at the moment. I still think that jungle Talia could probably do with a buff, and mid lane Talia could probably do with a slight nerf in her current state. But yeah, right now she sits as a C tier option. Kiana also sits within the C tier, like Rengar, like Nidalee, very hard champion to play. Requires very good mastery of the pick to kind of enable her to snowball and take over games within the jungle. If you already play it, you can continue playing it, and you should be able to get results. If you don't play it, I wouldn't really recommend it at the moment. She's not good enough to kind of recommend over, like, unless you're putting a lot of games into her, recommend over some of the BA S tier options in her current state. Sejuani and Rek'Sai wrap up the remaining C tier options. In the case of Sejuani, she's similar issues to Maokai and Skarner, so for she's a bit more performant in solo queue. The case of Rek'Sai, she's doing better at the moment. She could arguably be bumped up to the B tier. I think there is definitely room for her there, but she isn't quite performant enough to kind of just like, yeah, make that jump in her current state. So Rek'Sai, I'm going to leave her as a C tier pick, but you can consider her like a B/C tier option, along with some of the other options in the C tier. I think it just comes down to how much mastery in the champion, and always, if you're like an OTP, you should continue to play your pick unless it is in a very dire spot in its current state. Rek'Sai, yeah, I think it can contest with some of the better options if you have put a lot of time into it, but it's a pick I just wouldn't recommend at the moment. Probably could do with a buff though. I do think she is in need of one. Gwen sits as a C tier option. She might even, she probably remains as a C tier option long term, but the nerfs were meaningful. She's definitely like past what her prime was of the last couple of patches, which is unfortunate because I think most people have come to the conclusion that the rework was just a big failure and that they should just revert the rework. This champion has issues. Obviously, it is now incredibly elite skewed and competitively bound for top lane. Whether we see some unbinding of that and whether we see some unelite skewing, only time will tell. But right now, this pick is pretty bad for the average player in both jungle and even top lane in her current state. Moving on to the B tier, then we lead off with Lee Sin, who could also probably just do with a buff. I think the pick is just, I mean, for being like the second most popular jungler in the game, I think he's just slightly weak at the moment. Olaf probably sits towards the high end of the B tier. This pick has been gaining traction like quite aggressively over the last couple of patches. I think Olaf Jungle was already in a pretty solid spot. Then they did that E buff to him where the cast time has gone down. Helps his clear speed, helps his ability to more consistently do DPS onto a target without having to like interrupt his basic attack pattern. And I think he, as a pick, has really benefited from it. So I think he's more of a high beta option at the moment. So definitely watch out for Olaf's, especially into certain team compositions where he can get a lot of value. Moving on, Zed sits within the B tier. He's not actually doing as well at the moment. He's actually, like Talon, quite popular in the jungle. Talon really is one of the most performant elite skewed junglers. Zed, albeit clears incredibly fast, isn't quite as performant. He does remain as like a mid to low end B tier option, especially for like average play. I wouldn't really recommend playing Zed, but if you're an elite and you've already put the time in, then yeah, Zed can definitely get you results. I would just recommend the likes of Talon if you also play Talon over him, as Talon is like one of the best junglers within that kind of environment. Zyra sits towards the low end of the B tier as well. It's not that performant, but still can get the job done. A good AP jungler if you are running out of options within your pool. She can definitely be a good go-to, especially if you already play her. Has an incredibly fast clear speed, and if you can utilize that fast clear speed to do more stuff around the map, then she can be a valuable champion to help within your pool. Graves is alright. I think the pick isn't in its prime at the moment, but if you give it some gold and get some items on it, he can definitely do a lot of damage in snowball games. It's just not as consistent at the moment, and you have to be very comfortable playing Graves in his current state. He sits as more like a low beta option at the moment. Rammus, I just think is kind of underwhelming at the moment. For one of the easiest champions in the game, he should just be better than he currently is. He should consistently be like an AS tier option in my opinion, because the pick has very limited outplay potential and is very if you understand how to play against Rammus, it's very easy to just play around this champion. He is limited tools for what he can provide and needs very specific compositions and can only really come out as like a B4, B5, R5 kind of pick, especially with just for champion not being in as good of a state at the moment. Eve sits within the B tier, and I'm gonna have her next to Elise. I think they're just solid AP assassins. There is a bit of a split, I'd say, between Rammus and then these two. I think both these picks, if you give them gold, they can do a huge amount within the game, and if you're very comfortable playing them, I think they are great picks. Elise obviously has more early game agency. Eve has more mid game agency, and it's about getting like your Magi stacks and then snowballing really hard on these champions. Zac is an okay tank option at the moment. He has more outplay potential than the likes of Rammus. I think the pick is just not as good at the moment, with like direct nerfs he received like a while ago towards top lane. Zac, combined with some of his itemization just being a bit weaker at the moment, he's just doing alright. I'd have him as a middle of the pack B tier option. Shaco, I think if you opt into AP, is in a very good spot. Definitely deserving of a high B tier spot at the moment. AD Shaco is a bit less performant, but overall both can be good in the right circumstances. Obviously they buffed AD Shaco more recently, and he's definitely doing a bit better at the moment. So Shaco deserving of like a B tier spot. Udyr is alright. Like a lot of the B tier champions, I haven't got like great things to say about them, but if you pick them in the right spots and you're very comfortable on them, they can be very good champions. But for the average player, I would say they're just a bit under the bar at the moment. Udyr, I think, just mirrors that perfectly. I think this champion is just a bit under the bar in his current state. If you're an OTP, you're going to get the results. He will still be a good champion for you. If you're looking to just like put 10 games or like your first time champion, and I think Udyr is just not that great of an option for you. I think this champion requires a lot of mastery to really get good value out of the pick. Ivan sits within the B tier as well. The buffs he received more recently were very good for elite and competitive. They were the wrong direction to buff the champion, for he is not that performant in solo queue at the moment. He sits as like a very middle high-end B tier champion in his current state. Echo sits in the B tier at the moment. Honestly, a high B tier option. I think Echo with Olaf are like picks I would say are worth watching. I think both these champions can make the jump into the A tier in their current state. Shyvana sits as a B tier option. I haven't got much positive to say about Shyvana. She is an innately low elo skew champion, which if the opponent doesn't understand how to play against her or enables her to kind of get the conditions she wants to be functional within the game, will work. If the opponent punishes you, they invade you, they don't let you Drake stack, they're maybe not that tanky of a team composition, because that's kind of what Shyvana wants as a champion, then she just becomes really underwhelming in her current state. I think this pick could also probably do with a buff and should just be better for the average player. Teemo is the very low elo skew champion. He scales incredibly well. He has good tools for jungle, like the double duration blind, the enhanced damage on the poison against camps, the isolation dueling potential of this pick's pretty solid. I think there are things going for this pick, but he does have a lot of his power pushed into scaling at the moment, which does innately make him quite low elo skew. But like if you get to these late game scenarios, you have 2-3 items with your shrooms, he does a huge amount of damage and can be really hard for compositions which maybe don't opt into as much vision as they probably should do against Teemo. Yeah, he can really thrive in those environments. Mordekaiser sits within the B tier at the moment. The champion is fine for mid to low elo. I think he falls off quite hard once you go into high elo though. The champion is very slow moving, tends to require certain compositions to be really good, and yeah, just wants like tanks to really like smack down on and kind of like in isolation beat. He will lose to he will struggle in team in more coordinated games, because you just won't be given the same level of luxury with your clearing, with your like ultimate, which you want for like objectives. It will just struggle a bit more in those kind of environments, and I think that does kind of mark him down as like a B tier option. Other than that though, as a low elo option, I'd say he's more like a solid A tier pick. I think he's kind of underrated if anything. Jax is a great counter pick within the jungle, a great against the likes of Xin Zhao, who's very popular at the moment. It's very good into those auto-attack based junglers which have a really hard time dealing with Counter-Strike. It doesn't clear quite as well as some of the other options, but yeah, very solid B tier pick at the moment. Karthus is one of the most elite OTP skewed picks within the game. Like having put so many games into this champion and just making sure you can clear as effectively as possible and just maximize the amount of damage you can do within the game and within team fights is the main kind of like skill aspect of this champion. And if you don't do it well, you will struggle. You just won't as consistently win on this pick. But if you ever watch like a really high elo Karthus player play, they are outputting so much damage within the game. They are printing damage, and I think that is a very, very important aspect of the champion, which people should really focus on to improve when playing this kind of a pick. Trundle sits within the B tier. He's a very easy to play stat stick champion. I believe is going to be buffed maybe again. I think I saw something about that. That might not be true though. I might have to like recheck because he has been pillar buffed recently, but I thought they were going to go a bit harder on it, but they might have like that might have just been something else I saw. So yeah, Trundle sits within the B tier at the moment. The buffs he received not too long ago obviously helps him gap close a bit more consistently, but he still has issues with his clear, still has issues with his itemization, and that kind of prohibits him from being able to bump up to the A tier, but he's not a bad option and is very easy to play. I will wrap up the B tier, so the remaining B tier options are Belveth, who I think if you're a comfortable one is a very good champion. She's very elite and early game skewed, kind of akin to Kindred, where both these champions are very elite, invade predicated, and are like pretty early game skewed. Obviously, they both can scale incredibly well if getting access to their infinitely scaling resources, but it tends to be a bit more conditional, and until like 5-6 items, they just aren't going to be as good champions. But like on those like 6 item spikes, then yeah, they will go back to being like those scaling options, but then that's like really, really late game, which is often just at times just not going to happen when you're playing picks like these. And Hecarim, who I think is in a good spot at the moment. Obviously, not just the brain dead kind of I'm gonna stat check every champion and be unkillable pick. He requires skill to play at the moment, picking your timings correctly and making sure you're not just taking all the burst, because this pick doesn't have the same level of durability as some of his tank variations in the past. And also doesn't do the same level of damage as some of his assassin variants. So definitely sat in like a middle at the moment as like a very solid booster champion, and just maximizing the amount of like resources you can get on the pick and then translating that into damage within the game can be really valuable when playing this champion. I am losing my voice. Anyway, let's continue. So Darius sits within the B tier now. This pick lost a lot of power with Swifties being nerfed. It was meaningful for him. He can't as consistently gap close onto a target, and that is all this champion is about. If you can't get onto a target, this pick becomes really underwhelming. So definitely lost some power of that. Darius struggle isn't that performant anymore, and might get buffed at some point. Who knows? We'll have to see if they realize that they kind of, not even overnerfed him at the time. He just got Riot specialed where they nerfed his itemization after he'd already been nerfed. Moving up to the A tier then, we lead off with Vi and Poppy. So Poppy is doing really well in the jungle at the moment, a great counter pick into high mobility compositions. I really do recommend learning the champion in her current state. Vi also just doing decently for jungle at the moment. Obviously a competitive favorite in her current state, but still doing just well for average solo queue. Would be surprised if she ends up getting nerfed because of her pro presence at some point, but right now she seems to be in a pretty safe spot. So definitely pick which, if you have her within your pool, can be a very good option, especially in games where opting into a dive composition can be really valuable. Wukong still remains as an A2 option. He's still a great anti-AD champion, where getting access to like sacks on your passive and just skirmishing within the jungle can be really valuable. He scales really well as well. Getting like those item spike breakpoints can be really valuable on this pick. His ultimate's an incredibly powerful tool. Boya is a very low elo skew champion, but works really well within the environment where she is, kind of the most popular, most present, has the most presence. So mid, low elo, I would do recommend trying out Briar, see if you feel comfortable on the champion. The higher up you go, the harder this pick will be to pilot, because people will understand how to play against her kit. And I believe there is one person who maybe lingers between Grandmaster and Chow on EU West who does play, who is like a Briar OTP, but outside of that, you don't have a huge amount of them, so it is pretty hard to kind of pilot this champion within those MMR brackets. Talon is an incredibly elite skewed pick. Obviously, the range from like Diamond to like even Grandmaster Challenger is where Talon as a pick really thrives. He is like the premier smurfing champion as well. As my voice continues to die throughout doing this, I am going to have to rattle through these last couple of champions. But beyond, sits within the A tier. He is a great flex pick option. Does a lot of damage, has a global ultimate, and yeah, is in a really good spot for the jungle at the moment. Diana sits within the A tier as well. This pick also is in a very good spot at the moment. Has a very powerful ultimate, a great AP option if you are looking for an AP option within your pool. Dr. Mundo, a very easy to play pick, scales really well, is hard to punish, and that is really rewarding when you are, playing a pick like Mundo at the moment. Kha'Zix, a great AD assassin within the jungle at the moment. Does a huge amount of damage, can access, with the buffs you received to his passive not too long ago, has great, isolated kill potential, and does a huge amount of damage. Kayn probably sits towards the high end of the A tier now, maybe even an S tier option. I'll have to watch as the patch goes on. It's just performing really well on Cyclope Sword builds, I think in both forms at the moment. What else we got? Amumu drops from the S tier to the A tier, a low A tier option in fact. Amumu just isn't as performant in the moment. The pick, albeit, is very easy to play, has a lot of the things I really recommend when starting the game to play. It's not that performant for average play at the moment. Oh my god, this is horrific. I am really losing my voice. Yi is one of the best snowballing options in the game. If you give this guy gold, he will print damage. You can even trade kills on the tower, and it is usually beneficial for this pick. But you have to clear well, you have to fight well, and you really have to understand this champion's limits to get the most out of this kind of a pick. Viego is the jack of all trades jungler. Get one takedown, and he is an incredibly valuable pick for any arsenal of champions. Fiddlesticks is a high-end A tier option. Has a great ultimate. Has a great clear, very niche, most people won't know how to play against it and can be really rewarding for that. He will probably get nerfed next patch because of how good as a support he is at the moment, but jungle might get buffed, so definitely be careful of that because that is something which can be really powerful on the champion. Yorick sits within the S tier. This pick is still doing really well. Sits as a low S tier option, not quite like the premier S tier picks at the moment, which I recommend, but once again, got enough this patch, still not enough. Still, doing really well in mid to low elo. Neferi sits within the S tier, also got enough this patch. Also sits, towards the low end. Not gonna quite dominate the games quite like she used to, especially with the AD ratio nerf and the W cooldown nerf. Volibear sits within the A tier. The Rowan nerfs actually didn't affect him as much. He's just turned towards Cosmic Drive, and some of his AD options are performing quite well at the moment. Nunu sits within the S tier. This pick is a really good snowball champion. Obviously he has both the tank and the AP build variations. It's hard to play against full on compositions and can be really valuable, especially if you OTP the champion. Warwick is one of the best low to mid elo junglers in the game. Definitely do recommend this pick. Nilia is my premier AP option at the moment. Great into compositions which have hard, with limited lockdown tools. And then my three, premier AD options which are, easier to play. Zinzao is probably number 1. Jarvan number 2, and Nocturne number 3. Nocturne is an incredibly powerful ultimate. Jarvan has incredible lockdown potential and great, dive and, isolate, a immobile threat potential. I guess I'll just label it as that. And the Zinzao is my recommended jungle to play. I have lost my voice. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.